3 fake cops in dollar store uniforms are holding a clipboard and a boot clamp screaming about civic violations while one of their SUVs idles in my driveway. My garage is blocked. My patrol cruiser is boxed in. And Karen, yes, that Karen, is filming from her porch like she just caught a war criminal. Sir, we need to impound your vehicle over a $9 outstanding HOA balance, one of them says, waving an envelope like a warrant. Yep, that's me standing on the porch. You're probably wondering how I got into a driveway standoff with 3 fake rent-a-cops who don't realize I'm the actual chief of police in this town. It started with a $9 fine, just $9 measly bucks, stapled to my front door with bright orange tape like it was an eviction notice. Late dues payment, it said, in block letters above a threat of compound penalties. Now, I've lived in this neighborhood for going on 12 years. I've never missed a payment. I don't even handle the check myself. It's automated. Pulled on the 1st of every month straight from a bank account I barely touch. So when I saw that notice, I didn't get mad. Not at first. I figured it was a clerical error, a typo, some teenager on a summer job mixing up account numbers. I made a note to swing by the HOA office that Friday. That's where I met her. Karen Mitchell, newly elected president of our homeowners association. She was seated behind the counter in a pristine beige cardigan, sipping something from a monogrammed tumbler that I strongly suspected was 90% oat milk and 10% entitlement. Ah, she said, with a smile that made my skin itch. You're the one with the delinquency. I calmly explained the error, showed her the bank statement, even offered to print another copy. She glanced at it like it was a napkin I'd sneezed into and said, "We've already assessed the fee. You can appeal it at the next board meeting, or just pay it now and avoid escalation." Escalation. Over $9. I paid it just to be done with it, but that's not how Karen operates. The fine, it turns out, was only the opening move. Within a week, I had 3 more notices. Grass height over 3 inches, unauthorized mailbox ornamentation, my late wife's ceramic cardinal, and failure to display the correct bin color on recycling day. That one especially confused me since our trash service only issues one kind of bin. Then came the drones, little buzzing bastards with flashing lights and silent cameras that hovered over my backyard during dinner. I caught one just above my fence line, and when I traced it, it flew right back to Karen's garage. I have footage. I reviewed my own security cams and watched her launch it from behind her hydrangeas, like some kind of HOA Navy SEAL. Still, I said nothing. I'm not a hothead. I wear a badge for a living, and I've seen what happens when pride gets mistaken for purpose. But then it wasn't just me. I started hearing the stories. Jenkins on the corner, 20 years a firefighter, got cited for his hose reel being visible from the street. His son uses it to wash the engine on his dad's vintage Harley, but that didn't matter to Karen. Or the Parkers down on Hillside. She's an ER nurse, works 12-hour shifts, sleeps when she can. Got fined for unauthorized vegetation because she planted lavender without getting written approval. Lavender. Meanwhile, the board members had inflatable Santas up in April and left dead Christmas lights tangled in their gutters until May. The rules weren't rules, they were tools. And Karen was wielding them like a hammer. I tried to play it the right way. I went to the next HOA meeting, which felt less like a discussion and more like a disciplinary hearing held in a church basement. Karen stood at the podium like she was defending a doctoral thesis on fascism, pointing to slide after slide of compliance trends while selectively skipping over complaints filed by the people she didn't like. I asked about the drone surveillance. She said, "Our community has a right to feel safe." I asked about the mailbox cardinal. She said, "Symbolic imagery needs to be pre-approved to prevent unwanted affiliations." I asked about the selective enforcement, the firefighter, the nurse. She stared down at her tablet like she hadn't heard a thing. I finally pulled out the HOA charter, the original version from before Karen's reign, and highlighted the exact clause that prevents the board from modifying enforcement guidelines without a full community vote. She smirked and said, "Well, the board has since updated that language. No vote, no notification, just changed." My jaw clenched, but I let it go. I needed to know more. That night, I pulled the property map and reviewed the HOA's bylaws. Every inch of this neighborhood is under surveillance or subject to inspection. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules, she was weaponizing them. That's when I found something odd. Karen's street had 0 violations in the past 6 months. 0. Not one citation, not one notice. I ran the data across the entire HOA jurisdiction and confirmed what I'd suspected. Karen's friends, her appointees, her husband Bob, all living on the same street, were exempt. I couldn't prove it yet, but I was damn sure going to try. Over the next week, I started documenting. I wore body cam gear out in the yard. Every time a notice arrived, I took photos and recorded timestamps. I installed motion detection at the base of my driveway after I caught someone measuring the angle of my trash bins with a level. I watched my neighbor get cited for a cracked fence post that had been there for 2 years without complaint. It wasn't about the rules, it was about who enforced them and who was safe from scrutiny. What Karen didn't know, what nobody knew, is that I'm not just some guy with a badge. I'm the chief of police in this town, and I didn't get here by folding under pressure. I spent a decade cleaning out gang operations that had more discipline than this HOA board. I built internal affairs protocols in 3 counties. And while Karen was building her little dictatorship one lavender citation at a time, I was building a case file. I know how these things spiral. They start with one bully and a clipboard, but it doesn't end there. Not when the clipboard becomes a badge, not when the neighborhood becomes a battleground. I filed a formal complaint with the city zoning office, citing a breach in property rights due to unauthorized drone surveillance. I forwarded Karen's emails to a personal friend who works as a county ethics advisor. I opened a new file labeled Operation Nest Watch, and every violation she filed against me went into that folder, cross-referenced by timestamp and board meeting agenda. I even traced the HOA's payment vendor. The whole thing stinks, and I've seen enough bad money to know when the trail leads somewhere worse. Karen picked the wrong driveway to block. I may mow my own lawn and hang my own Christmas lights, but I've also had a badge long enough to know when someone's running a racket. The 9 fine? That was just the beginning, a smoke test. And now, thanks to Karen, the whole system's about to burn. I'm not just going to beat her at her own game. I'm going to dismantle the game board, rewrite the rules, and leave a plaque where her tyranny used to stand that reads, "Here lies Karen's reign, may she measure lawn height in hell." It happened on a Thursday morning, just past 7:00 a.m., when most of the neighborhood was still inside, sipping coffee or wrangling kids into car seats. I'd just come back from an early morning run, sweat still clinging to my shirt, when I heard the unmistakable clink of metal on metal outside. Not the sound of a dropped wrench or a car door, this was heavier. Industrial. I stepped out into my driveway and froze. 3 men were crouched around my personal vehicle, my off-duty Dodge Charger, attaching a boot clamp to the rear wheel. A 4th stood off to the side with a clipboard and what looked like a makeshift ticket book. All 4 of them wore matching navy blue vests with embroidered patches that read Willow Heights Property Control Division. The name alone sounded like a rejected title from a dystopian novel. One had an earpiece that wasn't connected to anything, another had on sunglasses despite the overcast sky, and the guy holding the ticket book? He was scribbling in pen on what I quickly realized were printouts from a Microsoft Word template, bold Arial headers, underlined violation codes, all the classic signs of a DIY enforcer operation. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. The guy with the clipboard stepped forward. He looked like a middle manager cosplaying as a cop, maybe 5'9", clean shave, gut pressing against the buttons of a knockoff tactical vest. "Sir," he said, "you're in violation of Section 12.7b of the Willow Heights Community Code. Failure to address outstanding balance." I blinked. Outstanding balance? You were notified of a pending fine and late payment totaling $89.57. We are here to collect or take enforcement action. Behind him, one of the others tightened the clamp on my rear wheel, ratcheting it with the kind of dramatic flair that comes from watching too many YouTube tutorials. I crossed my arms. "You mean the 9 fee that I already paid last month?" He didn't flinch. "Fees have compounded. The board has sent multiple notices." "You mean the ones printed on computer paper and stuffed under my doormat like a Domino's coupon?" "We are not here to debate." We're here to enforce. That's when I noticed it, his badge. A shiny, oversized emblem clipped to his chest that read, Property Control Division, in raised lettering. Beneath that, in fine print, it said, Willow Heights HOA Auxiliary Enforcement. No state seal, no agency number, just a lot of chrome and confidence. I looked around. By now, a few neighbors had started poking their heads out. Across the street, Mrs. Franklin was filming with her phone from behind her rose bushes. Two kids on bikes had paused at the corner, whispering to each other as the boot clicked into place. This was public theater, and I was the target. Let me see your business license, I said. Clipboard guy hesitated. We're authorized by the HOA board. That's not what I asked. Are you licensed, bonded, registered with the city to enforce civil penalties? Because if not, you're trespassing and tampering with private property. One of the boot guys stood up quickly, adjusting the strap on his vest. We're not police, he said nervously. We're just here for compliance. Damn right you're not police, I said. Because if you were, you'd know what's about to happen. I turned on my heel and walked into my garage, leaving the door open behind me. The clipboard guy shouted something about consequences, but I didn't hear it. I was too busy suiting up. Less than a minute later, I stepped back out in full uniform. My department issue badge clipped front and center, my sidearm holstered, radio crackling with dispatch chatter, and my body camera blinking red. I could feel the energy shift in the air like someone had just pulled the pin on a live grenade. The guy with the earpiece took a full step back. One of the boot techs dropped the ratchet tool. Clipboard guy opened his mouth, then closed it again. You boys got real quiet all of a sudden, I said. Funny how that happens when someone who actually has authority shows up. I walked straight to the front of the car and held out my hand. ID, all of you. Right now. The clipboard guy stammered. We weren't told. That's not my problem, I snapped. You are operating on private property without lawful authority, wearing uniforms that falsely imply official capacity, and attempting to impound a personal vehicle under a fabricated enforcement code. That's 3 violations off the top of my head. Now I'm going to say it once more, IDs, hands. Now. One of the boot guys tried to run, not far, just a panicked half-sprint down the sidewalk like his legs couldn't agree whether to move or collapse. I radioed dispatch with my call sign, requested backup, and gave a description of the suspects. Within seconds, 2 patrol cars were en route. I detained the clipboard guy and the 2 others still frozen in my driveway. The runner didn't make it far. Deputy Reynolds scooped him up 3 blocks away, out of breath and pleading ignorance. Turns out, none of them had any actual credentials. No business license, no bond, no training. 2 of them were ex-security guards from a mall across town, recently contracted by the HOA under Karen Mitchell's direction. The other 2 were cousins, literal family of HOA board members, being paid under the table to act as the HOA's enforcement division. Their entire operation was held together with discount patches, empty clipboards, and Karen's signature on a fake memo. I arrested the clipboard carrier, whose real name was Gerald but went by Officer G, for impersonating an officer and illegal vehicle tampering. The others were cited and released pending further investigation. Karen came stomping down the street not long after, her pastel robe flapping in the wind like some sort of suburban war banner. You've overstepped, she barked, finger pointed like a crooked sword. This is internal HOA business. I held up the fake badge, turning it slowly in my hand. This is criminal impersonation, Karen. And it's not your first offense. We have a right to protect community interests. No, you have a right to enforce bylaws within limits. What you don't have is the authority to assemble a private paramilitary unit and harass residents over pocket change. You had an outstanding balance, she shouted. It was on record. It was paid. But that's not even the issue anymore. You authorized unlicensed personnel to perform enforcement actions on private property. That's fraud. And now I have names, faces, and financial records. Her voice cracked. You're violating chain of command. I couldn't help but laugh. Karen, I am the chain of command. She stormed off, muttering about lawsuits and appeals. But the damage was already done. Neighbors had it all on video. The HOA's little militia had just tried to shake down the wrong driveway. And now I had a new angle to investigate. Where the hell did Karen get the money to hire 4 men, print custom uniforms, fabricate badges, and lease an enforcement SUV? Because this wasn't just about neighborhood rules anymore. This was a side hustle, a racket. And Karen was laundering power through bylaws the same way crooks wash cash, through vending machines. What I'd thought was petty tyranny was shaping up to be something bigger, coordinated, organized. And if I was right, it wasn't just me being targeted. The HOA board was running a full-scale grift under the guise of community protection, and I was just getting started. The morning after the Boot Squad debacle, I sat in my home office with a fresh pot of coffee and a migraine the size of Texas. My cruiser was parked safe and sound in the driveway again, the fake clamp removed and tagged into evidence. Gerald Officer G had spent the night cooling off in a holding cell with a copy of the penal code to read, and the HOA board had gone radio silent. But I wasn't interested in silence. I was interested in paper trails. And after 20 years of policing both back alleys and boardrooms, I knew this much: tyrants like Karen never stop at one racket. If she had the audacity to assemble a cosplay police unit and send them door to door like suburban debt collectors, there was more, much more, rotting underneath the manicured surface. So I started pulling records. And I didn't have to look far. See, what Karen didn't know was that every HOA in the state files annual expense reports through a third-party portal connected to our city's regulatory oversight system. Most boards don't even realize it's public information. I logged in using my department credentials, cross-referenced the Willow Heights HOA tax ID, and downloaded every available quarterly report for the past 3 years. Then I made a second pot of coffee. Because what I found wasn't just suspicious, it was the kind of crooked that makes accountants weep and RICO flags go up. In the past year alone, the HOA had billed over 80, zero to a line item labeled Community Safety Logistics, vague, catch-all, and completely disproportionate to a neighborhood with no gates, no real crime, and a part-time maintenance guy who only showed up on Tuesdays. That money wasn't going to fences or signage. It was being funneled to a company called Sentinel Ridge Solutions, LLC. Curious name, right? So I dug deeper. Business Registry listed the company as a private security consultancy, established 2 years ago, operating out of a P.O. box across town. The registered agent? One Ms. Darla Brooks, Karen Mitchell's first cousin. I confirmed it in 2 clicks. Their shared maiden name popped up on a voter registration database from 2009. The same Darla who, according to LinkedIn, used to be an aesthetician before pivoting to civil compliance entrepreneurship. It gets better. Sentinel Ridge had no city license, no liability insurance on file, no registered employees. And yet, they'd billed the HOA for 216 hours of patrol operations, 9-0 for vehicle deterrent systems, and 13-0 for unregulated occupancy resolution. I read that last phrase twice before realizing it meant threatening to evict people who left their porch lights on too late. I called in 2 people I trusted: Deputy Maria Ortega, my right hand at the precinct, and Marcus Nago, a cybercrime analyst who owed me a favor after I'd helped his sister get out of a bad lease. The 3 of us set up camp at my kitchen table and built a war room. We laid out spreadsheets, invoice scans, and financial disclosures, highlighting every irregularity in neon yellow. Maria cross-referenced names and addresses. Marcus pulled IP logs from the HOA website and started mapping login timestamps to physical locations. It wasn't long before we noticed patterns: suspicious logins tied to the same IP address as Karen's home router, activity spikes at 3 a.m., edits made to fine records and fee structures in the dead of night. Meanwhile, I canvassed the neighborhood. Quietly, I started with the retirees, those who'd lived here long before Karen came in with her spreadsheets and security cameras. That's when I met Mr. Placed, labor the retirees. And Mrs. Bellingham, a sweet couple in their late 70s with matching lawn chairs and an air of quiet fear. They invited me inside, and I sat at their table while they slid a stack of unopened envelopes across the wood. HOA violation notices. Over 20 in the last 2 months. Fines for things like improper mailbox flap angle and non-regulation mulch tint. The total came to over 2,000 in charges. We paid the first few, Mr. Tay, sublaks.enat. Bellingham said, voice shaking. Then they said if we didn't fix the color of our storm door, they'd file a lien on the house. Lien Enforcement Squad, Mrs. Quoten Times SOAS and ATF. Bellingham whispered. That's what they called it. Said they'd come take pictures, post warnings, and mark our file for collection. My blood went cold. These weren't fines, they were shakedowns. Old-fashioned extortion dressed up in legal stationery. And it wasn't just them. I spoke to a dozen more residents, many of them over the age of 60, all of them either intimidated or financially squeezed into compliance. Karen's board had weaponized the HOA charter and turned it into a silent tax on the vulnerable. Meanwhile, the money flowed into Darla's sham security company like clockwork. But the final straw? The thing that snapped the last thread of restraint I had left came the following Friday when my wife Samira showed me a text message from her nursing manager. It was a reminder about the new hospital parking pass she'd requested. But what caught my eye was the timestamp. That's weird, she said, frowning. They usually send these before the start of my shift, not after. Wait, I said, pulling out my calendar. Didn't you work a night rotation last week? Yeah. Graveyard shift. Why? I flipped back through the surveillance log Maria and Marcus had compiled. 3 separate HOA inspections had been recorded on our property within a 24-hour window, each time just minutes after Samira left for work. Once at 9:17 p.m., another at 2:04 a.m., the third, 4:46 a.m., was the morning of the fake clamp incident. That's when it hit me. The HOA wasn't just targeting homes randomly. They were timing their visits. And they were doing it using private emergency contact data collected from our own resident registration forms, the same ones we filled out when Karen asked for updated records for community safety. On that form, I'd listed Samira's occupation, employer, and basic shift schedule. So had dozens of other residents, and Karen had weaponized that information like a tactical map. I stared at the form in my filing cabinet, suddenly seeing it for what it really was, a blueprint for stalking, for control. That night, I brought it all together, the false fees, the made-up citations, the surveillance drones that several neighbors had now recorded flying from Karen's backyard under the cover of darkness, the fake contractor payouts, the threats to seniors, the misuse of emergency data. Marcus set up a secure server. Maria and I compiled a master file. Over 600 pages of documentation, including photos, video footage, financials, and board correspondence. We labeled it Operation Gatekeeper, and I sent a copy to the State Attorney General's office under whistleblower protections. But I wasn't done, because I knew Karen would try to bury it. She'd lean on her cousin, she'd call in favors, she'd cry about misunderstandings and technical errors. But what she didn't know was that I'd also sent the dossier to Channel 5 Investigates, and to the city's internal audit division, and to 3 residents who used to be attorneys, including one who once clerked for a federal judge. Karen had built her empire on fear, on fake fees and selective enforcement and data she had no business accessing. But fear only works when no one pushes back, and I wasn't just pushing, I was flipping the table. When I pulled into the neighborhood the next morning, something had changed. The HOA sandwich board sign, the one they used to announce meetings, was blank. No upcoming notices, no threats, no compliance updates. Just a single word scrawled in Sharpie across the bottom. Investigation. Karen's house looked quiet. The drone pad in her backyard was gone, but the air felt heavy, charged. Something was coming, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't the one being watched. I was the one watching. The final board meeting took place on a Tuesday night under the pretense of an emergency vote on expanded enforcement protocols. Karen had kept the details vague, just enough to keep the curious away and the loyal close. The agenda was printed on thick cardstock, sealed in gold envelopes like she was coronating herself, not chairing a suburban compliance meeting. What she didn't know was that every word of that agenda was already sitting in an evidence locker downtown, courtesy of a mole on the inside, Thomas Bradford, HOA treasurer, and secretly the only member of the board with a functioning conscience. He'd flipped after we showed him where Karen's community landscaping fund had really gone, namely, to her cousin's fake security company, a new vacation patio in Key Largo, and a custom-made kitchen backsplash modeled after Versailles. Thomas had cried when he saw it. I didn't judge him. Betrayal hits harder when it comes with HOA letterhead. Internal Affairs signed off the same afternoon. The DA's office gave me their blessing. And with Marcus running surveillance from a mobile command unit and Maria monitoring mics from a van 2 blocks over, I walked into the HOA meeting room not as a homeowner, but as a hammer waiting to swing. We arrived early. I wore a wire so sensitive it could pick up a heartbeat. Marcus had hardwired a camera into the base of the podium microphone. Maria disguised herself as a sleepy-eyed neighbor with a stroller parked just outside the window. Every angle, every whisper, every cover-your-mouth side conversation was going to be caught. The community center buzzed with the hollow chatter of board loyalists, clipboard clenchers, and serial petitioners. Karen entered 10 minutes late as always, like a tyrant who wanted her subjects to feel her absence. Her heels clicked against the laminate floor like gavel strikes. She wore a peach blazer and that same smug expression that said, "I dare you to challenge me." Half the board was there. Vice President Donna Weaver, Secretary Liam Cho, and Compliance Officer Hal McMillan, the man who once fined a wheelchair-bound woman for non-conforming ramp color. The rest were likely watching from their phones. Having learned to keep a low profile since word of our investigation had started to bubble through the neighborhood grapevine, Karen cleared her throat and opened the meeting with her usual flair. Tonight, we discuss next phase compliance. It's time we stop negotiating with habitual violators and start restoring order. She passed out copies of a new initiative called Tiered Property Oversight. On the second page was a proposal to install biometric locks on all neighborhood maintenance sheds, the kind that stored lawnmowers, tools, and hose reels. This is for security, she explained, and to ensure that only residents with clean compliance histories can access shared equipment. I raised my hand, playing the role of concerned but curious homeowner. What exactly are we protecting lawnmowers from, Karen? A coordinated weed whacker heist? She smirked. No. But people like you, people who question rules, who skirt dues, who accuse volunteers of fraud, make stronger measures necessary. People like me? I asked. What does that mean? She leaned over the podium, eyes glinting. Underminers, instigators, people who think law enforcement makes them immune to community values. My smile was slow, deliberate. I stood up, removed the folded document from my inner jacket pocket, and placed it gently on the table in front of her. Karen Mitchell, pursuant to a joint investigation by the City Attorney's Office and State Auditor's Division, I am placing you and this board under formal scrutiny for financial misconduct, wire fraud, surveillance without consent, impersonation of licensed enforcement personnel, and at least 6 counts of elder coercion. She laughed. She actually laughed. Until the side door opened and Maria walked in with a badge in one hand and a file box in the other. "We've got warrants," she said, dropping the paperwork on the table like a brick through stained glass. One by one, my team entered. 4 uniformed officers, 2 tech specialists, a county auditor with a laptop and a smug smirk. Karen's laugh died mid-breath. Donna's face went sheet white. Liam dropped his water bottle. Hal tried to stand up and stumbled into the folding chair beside him. "You can't do this," Karen whispered. "This is private HOA business." "No, Karen," I said, stepping around the table. "This is public fraud, with public money, in a city jurisdiction, and guess what? I am the jurisdiction." They were read their rights on the spot. Karen was arrested for embezzlement and conspiracy to commit civil impersonation. Donna and Hal were cuffed for aiding and abetting a fraudulent enforcement entity. Liam was taken into custody on suspicion of falsifying financial documents and creating ghost invoices. I watched each one get walked out of that community center, past the crowd of stunned residents who had gathered outside, phones out, jaws dropped. By morning, Every news outlet from Channel 5 to the local podcast crew was buzzing with headlines like, "Oh, a horror story ends in sting," and "Chief of Police busts suburban shakedown." The state froze the HOA's accounts within 24 hours. All fines issued in the past 18 months were suspended pending review. Residents began demanding transparency, and within 2 weeks, a vote was held. The results weren't even close. 91% in favor of dissolving the board. Gone. Karen moved out within the month. Listed her home for $100,000 below market. Cash offer. No disclosures. Rumor is she relocated to a condo in another district, where she has no authority and must now share a laundry room. I sent her a postcard, no return address. Just a picture of my cruiser parked square in her old driveway, 4 inches over the line. And the neighborhood? Oh, we bounced back. The Property Control Division SUV, the one they used for boot threats and late-night intimidation runs, got turned into a dunk tank for charity. We parked it at the spring block party, filled it with water balloons, and let the kids take turns throwing softballs at the compliance target. Every hit earned $1 toward the new playground fund. I personally bought the sign that now stands in my front yard, made of polished metal and rooted into solid concrete. It reads, "This property is protected by actual law enforcement." Simple. Effective. I haven't gotten a single violation since. Not a drone, not a notice, not a passive-aggressive email. I wake up to birdsong and not buzzing. My mailbox is a haven, not a threat. And my wife? She parks her car diagonally in the driveway now, just for fun. Some mornings, when the sun hits the porch just right, I sip my coffee and stare across the street at the house that used to be Karen's. It's quiet now. Peaceful. There's a new family living there. They planted roses out front, real ones, not regulation-approved bushes, and their kids rollerblade in the driveway. Last week, I parked my cruiser right in front of that house while I ran inside for lunch, 4 inches over the line. No citation, no ticket, just justice, and finally, a damn good cup of coffee.